Hey folks, this is Caleb. I'm here in Washington, D.C., downtown area. Today is the 11th of August. Tomorrow will be the 12th of August, and it will be Unite the Right 2.0. And a lot of these disgusting forces, white nationalists, Ku Klux Klan kind of people, they're going to be assembling here in the city. They've got a permit to be up there at the White House. That's just a few blocks up that way. I'm here on the National Mall. They've got a permit, and they're going to have a rally in front of the White House, anniversary of Charlottesville, and they're going to spew some of their disgusting hate and bigotry. And, I'm here, and I got to say, there's going to be a counter demonstration. The Answer Coalition has been set up in Freedom Plaza. A lot of left-wing folks are going to be demonstrating against them in Freedom Plaza, giving an anti-racist message. That's good. I think that's good to counter the hate. There's going to be a mobilization of the Antifa forces, I understand, that are going to assemble in a park and kind of march toward the alt-right and try to have some kind of confrontation. And, 5 or 6 years ago, before I was a journalist, when I was just kind of an activist, when I was really, I was in this Marxist-Leninist group and I really believed in what they were doing, and this group that I was in just kind of went along with the general message of the far left. That time, I would have been all about this. I would have been stoked. I would have been pumped, and I would have been all about the, the forces that were going out to, fight the right wing. And I would have been, saying things like, they won't give us our freedom, so why we won't give them theirs. And I would have been pumped up and ready for a fight, and I would have been fantasizing that this was the Weimar Republic, and we were on the barricades and fighting fascism, and it was now or never, and I would have been pumped up. I'm not an activist anymore. I'm a journalist. I just tell about the world how I see it. I report the news for international television. I write articles. And, I gotta just be frank and open and honest, okay? We are facing some very, very big problems in our country right now. And these alt-right guys are a symptom of those problems. We can all agree that they're disgusting. Let me just get that out of the way, right? There's a lot of people that try to take what I've said and take it out of context and try to say that I'm saying things I'm not saying. There is no question that people like Richard Spencer, people like David Duke, people that believe in biological racism, that some races are naturally better than others, people that want mass deportations of immigrants, people that admire Adolf Hitler, one of the greatest murderers in history, with Auschwitz and the gas chambers, people that advocate some kind of racial supremacism, and there's no question, people who want to blame all of our problems on immigrants, people who support the kind of police brutality we're seeing from the police and are cheering on the cops to kill more African Americans. There is absolutely no question that those people are disgusting. They're repugnant individuals. That ideology, that white nationalism, that Ku Klux Klanism, that supposedly National Socialism, Nazism, whatever they want to call it, there is no question that those people are disgusting. That's the first point I want to make. But beyond that, I think we've got a problem. We've got a big problem because, it's kind of hard to explain, but I'm going to try to put it in the simplest terms. During the 1960s, when the anti-war movement was first getting started, talk to any old veteran of the 1960s peace movement, somebody who was there at the beginning, like early 60s, 61, 62, 63, 64, when SDS was getting formed, when at first it was only like the W.E.B. Du Bois clubs and the Young Communist League and the Youth Against War and Fascism and the Socialist Workers' Party, when only the far left, who were considered to be no-gooders as far as society was concerned, right? They were, the USA was fighting communists around the world. Only people that were openly advocates of communism, only the extreme far left was demonstrating against the Vietnam War in the early years. And when that happened, you had the fringe right wing, like the John Birch Society, people who admired like Strom Thurmond and George Wallace, and people like that, these far right wingers would get together and they would attack anti-war protesters. They would get together when there was some kind of anti-war protest, they would mobilize, come together, and they would just go and beat up young socialists and communists, right? Beat them up, better dead than red, the John Birch Society. And this continued up throughout the 60s. And you can actually see instances where the police stepped in to defend the anti-Vietnam protesters, right? Because in a lot of cases, these protesters had peace permits. They had permits for their parades. They'd gone to court. But, you know, these alt-right, you know, and they weren't alt-right back then. They were just, you know, the far right, the John Birchers, the supporters of Barry Goldwater would assemble. They'd have signs that said, like, Nuke Hanoi. And these people were far right, and they were claiming that they opposed the establishment, but their main activity was going around beating up people who were, at that point, the main source of opposition to the system, right? At that point, you know, the left around the world was the Cold War, communism, and Marxism-Leninism was the main source of opposition to the status quo in the United States. And at that point, you had the far right. They would mobilize to beat up these people that were opponents of the liberal order, right? And they would gather and beat them up. And in some cases, you actually saw the government, I mean, you know, you saw them actually protect peace marchers from the far right, because the far right were extremists. And these far right guys, they claimed they were against the system, right? They would talk about, they thought Eisenhower was a communist. They thought both the Democrats and the Republicans were infiltrated by the Communist Party. They had all kinds of conspiracy theories. But at the end of the day, what did they do? They went around enforcing the liberal order, beating up people that were considered to be the main threat to it, the far left. And, you know, that was how it was. And the far right during the Cold War wasn't really defined by what it was for. It was defined by what it was against, right? It was against communism. Everyone they didn't like was a communist. They were against it, and anyone who purported to be a communist or might be a communist should be beaten up. They had all kinds of outrageous conspiracy theories linking the establishment to communists, and that was it, right? Well, what we're seeing is that in the decline of the Cold War, after the Cold War is over, now that, you know, that capitalism is, you know, still trying to seize control of the world, the global financial elites of Wall Street and London are taking control of the planet. Now that that's happening, but you don't have communism as the main source of opposition to them. Now that that's happening, it's almost like the far left has taken up the task that the far right once carried out. What do? You know, I mean, it used to be that people that were advocates of socialism and communism, they had a vision of a new world. They were fighting to create a new system, but now really the far left has become defined by what they're against, right? The far left are people who go to college, they get A+ on their papers, they're loved by their professors for just repeating the standard line, and they go around opposing anyone that they deem to be racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, or not in line with the liberal establishment. And, you know, at this point, the crazy thing is we're in a period where wars are being waged not in the name of fighting communism. During the Cold War, that was how, you know, when the USA would invade a country, attack Vietnam, Korea, well, we have to do this to fight communism. We have to do this to defend capitalism and the free market. Well, now, wars are waged on a liberal basis, right? We're invading countries to liberate women so that, you know, we can have more feminism. We're invading countries in order to bring freedom, right? The leader is always a dictator. And you see this if you read the U.S. press. The scariest thing, the Council on Foreign Relations, all of these voices of the establishment, Foreign Affairs magazine, they've started describing leaders like, you know, Vladimir Putin in Russia, the Bolivarians, Hugo Chavez, Maduro in Venezuela, the people of China, the leader of China, Xi Jinping. They're all populists. And they start equating people around the world that are actually, most of them are socialists and far left. They started calling them fascists. And that there's basically this feeling that any opposition to the liberal order is fascism, and that the main purveyor, the main force that is spreading, you know, socially liberal ideas like opposing racism and women's liberation and sexual freedom and democracy and the rights of the individual, that's what imperialism is doing, that the Western capitalists are just spreading liberal ideas around the world, and then that the main threat, anyone who's opposed to Wall Street, is the equivalent of Adolf Hitler, is somehow a fascist. And so the far left fits itself into this, whereas being a far leftist used to be defined by being opposed to the system, but advocating socialism, by advocating a new system. Now, being a far leftist means that you agree with the ideology of imperialism, that yes, you are against racism, sexism, colonialism, and all these things that the rest of the world, the developing world, has, and that you're just loudly extolling it, and that you're the biggest opponent of any force around the world that would challenge it, right? In a lot of cases, you see, you know, activists, far leftists that are more supportive of invading countries like Syria than the far right is. They say, hey, look, you know, we need to liberate these people. Assad is a sexist. He's an Islamophobe. I mean, it's getting crazy. It's really crazy. And the far left has basically taken on this role where you now have these people that are the alt-right, that bad people, not supporting them, but they don't agree with the cultural and social ideas that are being extolled by the imperialists. And so they're deemed to be a threat to the liberal establishment, and they are, right? They're reminding people of the ugly history of the United States, of Jim Crow segregation. They're reminding people of how, you know, there is still huge amounts of racism in the USA. They're not helping with the image the USA would like to present, that Barack Obama's presidency solved all racial problems. The alt-right guys, they make the USA look bad, and in some cases they're so isolationist that what they advocate, and what even the Trump presidency, which is not really tied with them, what it advocates is a position in which the USA is not intervening around the world. You know, and these guys are considered to be a threat to the liberal order. And so the far left, which used to stand for opposing that liberal order and presenting a socialist alternative, now the far left has basically been mobilized to defend the liberal order. And then the scariest thing that I see, and this is what really scares the crap out of me, there's so many of these people. If you talk to people on the far right, which I do, I go with microphones to rallies, I interview people on both sides. If you talk to people on the far right, a lot of them aren't, I mean, they ain't that smart to begin with, but a lot of them at the end of the day, what they think, and the reason that they become far right is because they've been told, hey, are you mad about you know, opium, you know, opioids killing people? Are you mad about the crisis of unemployment, the drop in the standard of living? Do you want to do something about it? Well, that means you're a fascist. That means you're a white supremacist. And so they say, okay, I guess I am. And it's the saddest thing, that it used to be that being a leftist, being a socialist or a communist, was what they called people that were opponents of the status quo. But now that there is no Soviet Union, now that the Cold War is over, people who are critical of the establishment, leaders around the world who are critical of Wall Street and London's global order, everyone that they disagree with is called a Nazi or a fascist. So you get a lot of people that are just mad at the system, and they don't really have well thought out political ideas. That's very common in the USA. People don't really think about politics here. And they start embracing these ideas simply out of opposition to the liberal establishment. Meanwhile, the left ties itself to the liberal establishment. It sees basically its entire existence as simply being enforcing the liberal establishment. And this is just a big, big mess. And the saddest part of all of this is that a lot of people are getting hurt. You know, it's a mess. It's a big, big mess. You know, I gotta say, you know, I'm a far leftist. I am. And I believe in historical progress. And I believe in socialism and Marxism. And I got interested in Marxism because I read a book, a beautiful book, published in 1932 called Towards Soviet America, written by William Z. Foster. And in that book, you know, William Z. Foster, he described a vision of a new United States where the banks, factories, and industries would be run by the people. They were actually going to create an independent black republic and have a government that opposed racism. They were going to provide every American working family with a job. And that book that William Z. Foster wrote, he was the Communist Party presidential candidate back in 1932. That book he wrote, it didn't just speak for one guy. It spoke for hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, I'm here in Washington, D.C. The National Mall is like right behind me there. You know, in 1931, there was an occupation of the National Mall. It was the Veterans Bonus March, and thousands of veterans, led by communists, occupied the National Mall to oppose the cutting of veterans' benefits, to demand veterans' benefits. Communists organized veterans to fight for their rights. There were the hunger marches here, you know, in which thousands of unemployed people would just set up tents here and demand worker wages now, led by the Communist Party. The slogan was "Fight or starve. Don't starve, fight." And the Communist Party at that point was one of the biggest and loudest voices against racism in the United States. And their message was basically that racism is a tool of the bosses. The people who suffer the most from it are obviously the African-American community, right? The African Americans are discriminated against, last hired, first fired, demonized. But at the end of the day, you know, the way that they are castigated, it's bad for the white working class too. that the white working class, by being told that they're better, they have a little bit of privilege because they're not black, by being mobilized to attack, the black workers, this is a tool of the bosses to divide the working class. And the vision was for a new society in which black and white stood arm in arm against Wall Street monopolism and against imperialism. And that was what the Communist Party was all about. It wasn't about just beating people up that were against the liberal order. It was about fighting for a whole new world. But increasingly on the left, you can't do that. The left has increasingly become a home for rather conforming people. People that consider themselves to be left are people that get straight A's in college, people that kiss enough ass and become experts on gender theory and oppression theory and are the most conforming, obedient people. They got teachers who are like 60s radicals. And so people that are confused, the ones that aren't very smart, end up on the far right. Others just, people that oppose the establishment, they don't find a home in politics. It's just becoming a big mess. And at the end of the day, things are getting worse in America. Wages are dropping. The standard of living is in decline. People are getting poorer. The suicide rate is very high. Unemployment numbers are down, but the wages are still low. And this is a mess, right? The young people of the USA are not going to have the standard of living their parents have. Society is destabilizing. Drugs are everywhere, suicide. Things are getting worse in the United States of America. There's the danger of a new global war against Russia or China. But at the end of the day, no one's saying what William Z. Foster and Eugene Debs and the socialists of the past, Huey Newton, no one's saying what they said. No one's saying we need to fight for a new society where the economy is organized to serve the people and the banks, factories, and industries work in the benefit of the people, not in the interests of profit. No one is saying that. That message is completely absent. There are racists, disgusting racists that are mobilizing on the far right, and then there is the left that is defending the establishment and goes around pointing fingers at anyone, and calling people racist, sexist, transphobic, and homophobic, and telling the white working class that is angry right now at the conditions, telling them, well, they've got it too good, and they shouldn't be complaining because look how much people of color have suffered. It's a big mess. This is a big mess that we're in this country. I love all the people of this country, and I love all the people of the world, but the people of America, you're my people. I was born in Ohio, small town surrounded by cornfields, graduated in a class of 115 people. I am worried about the future of my country. Capitalism is having a global meltdown. The standard of living is dropping. Racist demagogues are emerging, trying to manipulate us. The far left is being duped and no longer stands for the principles it once stood for. People ask me, Caleb, are you a Marxist, Lenin? Are you still a communist? Well, look, this is what I'll say. I still believe that the rule of the dollar is wrong and that we need a society that is mobilized to serve working families. I still believe that racism and any ideology that seeks to subjugate people and put people down and degrade them and humiliate them is wrong. I believe we need a society where working people come first, where the economy is planned. I still believe that the 20th century and the fact that Russia and China went from being deeply impoverished countries to becoming global superpowers by seizing control of their economy and rationally organizing it, I still believe that that proves that we can do better than capitalism. Capitalism is destroying America right now. The billionaires, elites, they're making money and profits. They're making money from private prisons and overprescribing opioids and bombing and destroying countries. They are grinding our country into deeper poverty. I still believe we can do better than that, and that a new America can be created with socialism. That's what I believe. I don't fit in on the far left because I don't want to be manipulated to serve the status quo, and I think that the messaging, the message that average working class people who are white have it too good and that they're the problem and they should be ashamed of themselves, I don't agree with that message. I don't fit on the far right because the far right, they are about sadism and cruelty and bigotry, and they preach disgusting, outdated ideas. I'm never going to be a far rightist. I will never be a fascist. But at the end of the day, the far left, it needs to get back to the principles that once made it strong. Back when the Communist Party USA was a strong organization, back when Eugene Debs was a household name, back when the Black Panthers were the most loved political grouping in the black community, the message was about bringing people up. It was about building a new world and fighting against injustice. And it was about opposing this liberal order that says that individualism is the highest good, and that the highest purpose in life is material comfort, and that fighting for a cause or believing in anything means you're a sucker and you're a dupe, that everyone is just a selfish asshole, and that we should all just be working in the interests of our own short-term game. I reject that. I reject that. We need a world where people have a community that they can belong to. We need a world where people care about each other and take care of each other. We need a world where no one is taking pleasure in tearing down and harming other people. I still believe that. You can call that whatever you want. That's what I believe. I'm worried about the future of the United States of America. I'm worried about how many people are probably going to get hurt tomorrow here in D.C. I'll be doing my job. I'll be reporting the news. That's what I believe. That's my opinion. Washington, D.C. is preparing for Unite the Right 2.0 and a big meltdown between a far left and a far right that are all wrong.